out. She fell to her knees in the wheat, still clutching that sheet like it was the last thread holding her to dignity. Jack had seen that look before, in soldiers who'd lost everything but refused to surrender. It did something to his chest, made his heart pound in a way it hadn't since Antietam. "People don't belong to anybody," Jack said, his hand finding the Colt 45 on his hip. The metal was warm from the sun, familiar as breathing. Seth Wallace laughed, young and mean. "This one does. Her husband owed us $800 before he died. She's working off the debt." Jack looked at the bruises climbing Elizabeth's arms. The rope burns on her wrists. "Doesn't look like honest work to me." "The law says a widow's responsible for her husband's debts," Roy said, leaning forward in his saddle. "We're just collecting what's ours." Elizabeth's voice cracked like a gunshot. "They killed him. They killed Thomas and made it look like Apaches." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a prairie fire. Jack studied her face, and suddenly he recognized her. He'd seen her in town 6 months ago, buying medicine for her sick husband. She'd smiled at him just once, quick as lightning. He'd carried that smile through 100 lonely dinners, though he'd never admitted it to himself until now. "That's a serious claim." "Ma'am," Jack said slowly. "It's the truth," she said, and her voice had steel in it now. "I saw them. I was in the root cellar when they came. They didn't know I was there." Roy's hand moved toward his gun, the woman's disturbed by grief. "We're taking her back for her own good." "No." Jack stepped between Elizabeth and the riders. "She's on my land now. That makes her under my protection. You want to die for some woman you don't even know?" Seth asked, eager for violence, the way young men sometimes are. Jack's smile was thin and dangerous. "I've killed men for worse reasons. At least this time I'd sleep easy after." The Mexican standoff stretched tight as barbed wire. The wind whispered through the wheat, carrying the smell of coming rain. Elizabeth stayed on her knees behind him, but Jack could feel her gathering strength, preparing for something. Then she said the words that changed everything. "You're Jack Turner. You saved my brother at Bull Run." The memory hit him like a cavalry charge. William Reed, 18 years old, bleeding out in the mud while Jack held pressure on the wound for 6 hours. The kid had lived, wrote letters for 5 years, then stopped. Jack always wondered why. "William died of tuberculosis 3 years ago," Elizabeth said quietly. "But he told me about you. Said if I ever needed help, find Jack Turner in Wyoming. Said you were the only truly good man he ever met." Roy spat tobacco juice into the wheat. "Touching story. She's still coming with us." "The hell she is," Jack said, and now his gun was in his hand, smooth and natural as breathing. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn those horses around and ride out. You're going to forget about this debt, and you're never going to come near Mrs. Thornton again." 3 against 1, old man," Seth said, his hand hovering over his pistol. "4 years of war taught me math doesn't matter much when you're shooting straight," Jack replied. "Your brother Roy knows my reputation. Ask him how many men I killed at Shiloh. Ask him why they called me Cemetery Jack in the cavalry." Roy's face had gone pale. He'd heard the stories. Everyone had. Jack Turner was the man who'd held a bridge against 20 Confederates with nothing but a rifle and rage. The man who'd supposedly died twice and come back both times meaner than before. But it was Elizabeth who ended the standoff. She stood up, tall and proud, despite the sheet, despite everything. "I know where Thomas hid the money," she said. "The $800. I'll get it for you if you leave now and never come back." Roy's eyes lit up with greed. "Where?" "Hidden in the old mine shaft on our property. I'll draw you a map." She looked at Jack. "Mr. Turner has paper inside, don't you?" Jack understood immediately. There was no money, but there was an old mine shaft, one that had been boarded up for years after a cave-in. Dangerous ground for men who didn't know the area. "That's right," Jack said. "Come on up to the house. We'll get you that map, and you can be on your way." The strange procession moved toward Jack's modest ranch house. Elizabeth wrapped in her sheet like some ancient queen, Jack walking beside her with his hand still on his gun. The Wallace brothers following on horseback, suspicious but too greedy to leave. As they walked, Elizabeth stumbled. Jack caught her arm, and for a moment they were close enough that he could smell the sage and dust in her hair. see the gold flecks in her grey-green eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he whispered back. "This is far from over." The house came into view, small but solid, built to last through Wyoming winters and human cruelty both. Jack had built it with his own hands after the war, each board a prayer for peace. Now he was about to fill it with violence again. But looking at Elizabeth, at the stubborn set of her jaw and the fire still burning in her eyes despite everything, he knew he'd tear it all down board by board if that's what it took to keep her safe. Inside the house, the air changed. What had been vast and dangerous outside became close and electric between these walls. Jack's home was simple. One main room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table he'd built himself, and his mother's rocking chair that he'd hauled all the way from Missouri. Elizabeth stood in the center of it all, still wrapped in that white sheet, looking like something out of a dream he didn't dare have. The Wallace brothers waited outside, their greed making them patient for once. Jack pulled a piece of paper from a drawer, his movements careful and deliberate. Elizabeth took the pencil he offered, and their fingers brushed. That small touch sent lightning through him, which was ridiculous. He was 43 years old, not some green kid. But something about her, maybe the way she held herself together when everything was falling apart, made him feel things he'd buried with his war dead. "The mine shaft is here," Elizabeth said, drawing with a steady hand despite everything. She marked a spot near Poison Creek, where Jack knew the ground was treacherous after spring rains. "The money's in a strongbox about 20 feet down. You'll need rope." She was brilliant. The abandoned mine was a death trap. If the Wallace brothers went down there at night, greedy and careless, there was a good chance they wouldn't come back up. "I'll need to clean up," Elizabeth said, looking Jack straight in the eye. "And find proper clothes." "I can't travel like this." "Travel!" Roy had pushed his way inside, suspicious as a rattlesnake. "You're coming with us to show us exactly where." "No," Jack said. "She's told you where it is. That's enough. Maybe we take her anyway," Seth said from the doorway, his young face ugly with possibilities. "Make sure she's not lying." Jack moved so fast that Seth didn't have time to blink. One moment Jack was by the table. The next, he had Seth's arm twisted behind his back and the boy's own gun pressed against his temple. "Maybe you don't," Jack said quietly. "Maybe you take that map and you leave while you still can." Roy's hand went to his gun, but Jack just pressed harder against Seth's temple. "I survived 4 years of war, Roy. You really think I care about adding 3 more bodies to my count?" "Easy now," Roy said, hands raised. "We'll take the map. But if that money's not there, it's there," Elizabeth said, her voice steady as stone. The Wallace brothers left, Seth rubbing his arm and throwing murderous looks back at the house. Jack watched them ride off toward Poison Creek, then barred the door and checked the windows. When he turned back, Elizabeth had sunk into his mother's rocking chair. And finally, she let herself break. The tears came silent at first, then harder, her shoulders shaking with the weight of what she'd endured. Jack didn't know what to do. He'd faced Confederate cavalry charges with less fear than he felt watching this woman cry. But instinct older than war moved him forward. He knelt beside the chair, not touching, just being there. "They killed him in front of me," she whispered. "Thomas was sick, could barely stand, and they shot him like a dog. Said it would look like Apaches did it. Said no one would believe a woman anyway." "I believe you," Jack said. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw his own loneliness reflected in her eyes. 2 people who'd lost too much, standing at the edge of something neither of them expected. "William wrote about you for years," she said. "Every Christmas, a letter about the man who saved him. He said you held his wound closed with your bare hands for 6 hours. Said you sang to him to keep him conscious." Jack's throat tightened. He was just a kid. "Somebody's brother." "My brother," she said softly. "My only family. When he died, Thomas was all I had left. And now you have a safe place," Jack said. "For as long as you need it." She studied his face like she was memorizing it. "Why? Why risk everything for a stranger?" Jack thought about lying, making up something noble, but looking at her he found only truth. "You smiled at me once, in town, at Patterson's store. You were buying medicine for Thomas, and I was picking up supplies. You smiled at me like I was worth smiling at. Been a long time since anyone looked at me that way. Elizabeth's hand found his, her fingers still cold from shock. I remember. You helped me carry the medicine to the wagon. Your hands were gentle. I noticed because Thomas's hands were always angry by then, even when he didn't mean them to be. They stayed like that for a moment, her hand in his. Two broken people finding something whole in the space between them. Then practicality took over. Jack found clothes that had belonged to his mother, stored in a trunk that smelled of lavender and lost time. A simple cotton dress, blue as a Wyoming sky, that would have been too short for Elizabeth but would do for now. I'll heat water for a bath, Jack said, then caught himself. I mean, I'll heat it and leave you to... I'll be outside. For the first time since she'd stumbled into his field, Elizabeth almost smiled. Mr. Turner, you're blushing. Jack, he said. Just Jack, and I don't blush. It's sunburn. This time she did smile just a little, and it transformed her face. He could see the woman she'd been before grief and violence marked her. Strong, clever, probably laughed loud at things that weren't quite proper. He wanted to know that woman, wanted it with a fierce ache that surprised him. While Elizabeth bathed, Jack stood guard on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. The Wallace brothers would reach the mine soon. Would they be stupid enough to go down at night? He hoped so. Problems that solved themselves were the best kind, but his mind kept drifting to the woman in his house. The way she'd stood tall, even when everything was trying to break her down. The way her hand felt in his, not soft like a lady's should be, but strong from ranch work. Thomas Thornton had been a fool, letting anger poison what should have been precious. Jack, Elizabeth's voice called from inside. He turned to find her standing in the doorway, wearing his mother's dress. It was indeed too short, showing her ankles and the cuts on her feet from running. But she'd braided her still damp hair, and in the lamplight she looked like something out of a story, the kind cowboys told around fires to keep the loneliness at bay. The Wallaces will come back, she said. When they don't find money. Let them come, Jack said. You don't understand. They have the law on their side. A widow belongs to her husband's estate. They can claim everything, the ranch, the cattle, even me. Not here, Jack said. On this land, I'm the law. Elizabeth moved closer, and he could smell the lavender soap she'd used, could see the determined set of her jaw. I won't bring trouble to your door. You've done enough. In the morning, I'll leave. Where would you go? East, maybe California. Somewhere they won't follow. Running's no life for a woman like you. What kind of woman am I? She asked, and there was something dangerous in the question, something that made the air between them crackle, the kind who stands tall when others would kneel, the kind who thinks fast enough to send evil men to their probable deaths with nothing but pencil and paper, the kind who makes a man remember why he fought a war in the first place. The words hung between them like a promise. Elizabeth reached up, her fingers gentle on the scar that ran along his jaw. This, shrapnel, and Tetum, and this. Her thumb found another scar on his hand. Knife fight. Kansas, protecting a free soil family from border ruffians. You've been protecting people a long time, she said softly. Never wanted to before. Not like this. The sound of horses coming fast through darkness shattered their moment. Jack grabbed his rifle and pushed Elizabeth behind him, but she grabbed a fire poker from beside the hearth, refusing to hide. They stood together, ready for whatever came next. But it wasn't the Wallace brothers who burst through the door. It was Sheriff Tom Daniels from town, badge glinting in the lamplight, face grim as a gravestone. Jack, the sheriff said, then noticed Elizabeth. Mrs. Thornton, I've been looking for you. Tom, Jack said carefully. They'd known each other for years, shared drinks and war stories. But a badge could change a man's priorities. What brings you out this way? The Wallace brothers are dead, Tom said flatly. Found at the bottom of Poison Creek mine shaft. Rope snapped, apparently. Elizabeth's hand found Jack's in the darkness behind their backs, her fingers trembling. Jack kept his face neutral. That's unfortunate, is it? Tom studied them both. They came to me yesterday. Said Mrs. Thornton here owed them money. Said she'd run off, might be dangerous. Do I look dangerous, Sheriff? Elizabeth asked, stepping forward in that too-short dress, her feet still bandaged from running. Tom's eyes took in her bruises, the rope burns on her wrists. His jaw tightened. "No, ma'am. You look like someone who's been through hell. The Wallaces killed my husband," Elizabeth said simply. "Made it look like Apaches. I saw them do it." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, then sat down heavy in a chair. "I suspected as much. Thomas wasn't the type to get caught by raiders. Too careful. But the Wallaces had Judge Morrison in their pocket. Without proof, so what now?" Jack asked. Tom looked between them, saw their hands still touching, and something in his face softened. "Now nothing. The Wallaces died in an accident. Tragic mining accident. Happens all the time out here. As for Mrs. Thornton's debts, well, dead men can't collect. That's simple." Elizabeth asked. "Nothing simple," Tom said, standing. "But sometimes justice finds its own way." He paused at the door. "Jack, you should know there's talk. About you taking in Mrs. Thornton. People have opinions about a widow living with a bachelor." "Let them talk," Jack said. "It could hurt her reputation. Make it hard for her to start over." Elizabeth laughed, bitter and sharp. "My reputation? Sheriff, I was dragged through town in nothing but a sheet. I think that ship has sailed." Tom tipped his hat. "Fair point, ma'am. Jack, you might want to consider making things proper, for both your sakes." He left then, the sound of his horse fading into darkness. They stood in sudden silence, the sheriff's words hanging between them like a challenge. Make things proper. As if anything about this was proper. And if proper mattered when two broken people found each other in the wreckage. "He's right," Elizabeth said finally. "I should go." "You've done enough. Stop!" Jack turned to face her fully. "Just stop. You want to know what I think? I think proper is for people who haven't seen what we've seen. I think proper is for folks who haven't had to rebuild themselves from nothing. You want to leave? I won't stop you. But don't leave because of what people might say. Then why should I stay?" The question hung in the air like gunsmoke. Jack thought about all the reasons he could give her. Safety, shelter, time to heal. But looking at her in his mother's dress, her chin raised despite everything, he found himself speaking a deeper truth. "Because I've been alone for 10 years, he said. "I built this place board by board, made it strong enough to keep the world out. But tonight, with you here, it feels like a home for the first time. Because when you look at me, you don't see Cemetery Jack or the war hero or the dangerous loner. You see something else. Something I thought died at Antietam." Elizabeth moved closer, close enough that he could see the pulse beating in her throat. "What do I see?" "A man who could love someone, if he remembered how." She reached up, her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart race beneath flannel and fear. "I'm broken, Jack. What they did, what they took. I might never be whole again. Then we'll be broken together," he said, covering her hand with his. "Broken things can still be beautiful, still be strong. Is that what we're doing? Being broken together? If you'll have me. If you'll stay." Elizabeth studied his face in the lamplight, this man who'd killed for her, who'd stood between her and evil without hesitation. She'd loved Thomas once, before illness and debt turned him bitter. But that had been a young love, built on promises and dreams. This thing with Jack was different. It was love born from understanding, from recognizing another soul that had been through hell and chosen to keep walking. "The ranch," she said. "Thomas's ranch. It's mine now legally. 40 acres with good water. We could combine the properties, make something bigger, better. Is that a business proposal?" Jack asked, though his hand tightened on hers. "It's a proposal," she said simply. Jack's breath caught. "Elizabeth, I know we've known each other one day. I know it's madness, but I also know you saved William at Bull Run. I know you stood between me and those men without knowing anything about me except that I needed help. I know you've been gentle when you could have taken advantage. And I know that when I look at you, I see the life I want to build from the ashes of the one I lost." Jack pulled her closer, his hands framing her face. "People will talk. They'll say you're marrying for protection, that I'm taking advantage. Let them. We'll know the truth. What truth is that?" Elizabeth smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. That sometimes the best love stories start with the worst days. That sometimes two broken people make one whole life. Jack kissed her then, gentle as sunrise, careful of her bruised lips. She tasted like lavender soap and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, her eyes were bright with tears, but also with something else, hope. "There's a preacher in town," Jack said. "Reverend Mills. He'd marry us tomorrow if we asked." "Tomorrow," Elizabeth agreed. Then softer, "Jack, that song you sang to William, what was it?" Jack's throat tightened. "Amazing Grace, my mother's favorite. Will you sing it for me?" I can't close my eyes yet. Every time I do, I see them. But maybe if I heard something beautiful." So Jack sang, his voice rough from years of whiskey and loneliness, but true. Elizabeth curled against him in his mother's rocking chair, and he sang her through the darkness. Sang about grace that saves wretches, about being lost and found, about dangers, toils, and snares already overcome. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, and the Wyoming wind rattled the windows. But inside, two people who'd thought love was behind them discovered it waiting in the most unexpected place, in the ashes of tragedy, in the courage to trust again, in the simple act of one person standing guard while another finally rests. By morning, the news had spread through the valley like wildfire. Jack Turner, the hermit rancher who'd spoken to no one for years, was marrying the widow Thornton, the woman who'd survived the Wallace brothers. Some called it scandalous. Others called it romantic, but in the little church at the edge of town, as Jack slipped his mother's wedding ring onto Elizabeth's finger, the only word that mattered was the one she said when Reverend Mills asked if she'd take this man. Yes. 5 years passed like seasons on the Wyoming plains, some harsh, some gentle, all of them shared. The combined ranch had grown to 300 acres, with cattle grazing, where once there'd been only loneliness. But the real change wasn't in the land. It was in the laughter that now filled the house Jack built. In the garden Elizabeth planted where nothing had grown before. In the way broken people from 3 counties over started showing up at their door, knowing they'd find help without judgment. Jack stood on the same porch where he'd first decided to protect Elizabeth, watching her teach the Morrison girl how to birth a calf. Elizabeth's hair had threads of silver now, earned through Wyoming winters and hard-won joy. She moved with confidence, those same hands that had once clutched a white sheet in desperation, now steady and sure, guiding new life into the world. "Easy now, Mary," Elizabeth said to the girl. "Life comes in its own time. We just help it along." The calf slipped free, wet and perfect, and Mary Morrison, whose own father had thrown her out for getting pregnant without a husband, cried with wonder. Elizabeth helped her clean the calf, then pulled the girl into a fierce hug. Jack's heart swelled watching them. His wife had turned their ranch into a sanctuary for women like Mary, girls with nowhere else to go. "You did it," Elizabeth told Mary. "You brought life into this world. Don't let anyone tell you that's not holy." That evening, as they did every Sunday, half the valley gathered at their ranch for dinner. The table Jack had built for 2 now stretched the length of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs and grateful faces. There was Samuel, the freed slave who'd come through heading west and stayed to work the horses. Martha, the banker's widow Elizabeth, had helped escape her violent brother-in-law. Tom Daniels, the sheriff, who'd become their closest friend. Even Reverend Mills, who'd married them that desperate morning 5 years ago. "Tell the story, Mr. Jack," called out young Billy Patterson, all of 8 years old and fascinated by everything. "Tell about the day you met Mrs. Elizabeth." The table went quiet, everyone leaning in. They'd all heard it before, but like all good stories, it got better with telling. Jack looked at Elizabeth, who smiled and nodded. "Well," he began, "it was the worst day that became the best day. Sometimes that's how love works. It shows up when you're not looking, wearing unexpected clothes. Or no clothes," Elizabeth added with a laugh that scandalized Reverend Mills and delighted everyone else. Poor Jack. There he was, expecting a quiet afternoon, and instead he got a 6-foot-tall problem wrapped in a borrowed sheet. "Best problem I ever had," Jack said, catching her hand. Tell about the Wallace brothers, Billy insisted. And the mine. The Wallace brothers learned what happens when you corner something you think is weak, Jack said carefully. They forgot that the strongest steel comes from the hottest fire. They looked at Elizabeth and saw a victim. They were wrong. Dead wrong, Sheriff Daniels added dryly, raising his glass. As the evening wore on and neighbors drifted home, Jack and Elizabeth cleaned dishes side by side, moving in the easy rhythm of people who'd learned each other's ways. Through the window they could see Mary Morrison in the barn with her new baby. Not the calf, but her own son, born 2 months ago with Elizabeth serving as midwife. They'd given her a home, work, dignity, the same gift they'd given each other. Any regrets? Jack asked, the same question he asked every anniversary. Just one, Elizabeth said, and he tensed until he saw her smile. I wish we'd met sooner. Think of all the years we could have had. We got the years that mattered, Jack said, pulling her close. The ones where we knew who we were, what we'd survived. Young love is beautiful, but this, what we have, this is iron forged in fire. A knock at the door interrupted them. Outside stood a young woman, barely 20, with a black eye and a split lip, holding a carpet bag with broken handles. Are you Mrs. Turner? She asked Elizabeth. They said in town. They said you help women like me. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. Come in, dear. You're safe now. As Elizabeth led the girl inside, Jack caught her arm gently. We're running out of room. Then we build more rooms, Elizabeth said simply. That's what you do when love makes your life bigger than you planned. Later, as they lay in bed, listening to the wind sing through the rafters, Elizabeth traced the scars on Jack's chest, each one a story, a survival, a step toward this moment. I used to think these were ugly, Jack said quietly. Evidence of violence, of everything wrong I'd done. And now I think they're the map that led me to you. Every fight, every wound, every lonely night, they were all just the long way home. Elizabeth kissed him then, soft and certain. Remember what you told me that first night? Broken things can still be beautiful. I remember. We're not broken anymore, Jack. We're whole. We took all our sharp edges and rough places and built something worth having, something worth keeping. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, covering the ranch in quiet white. But inside was warmth and love, and the kind of peace that only comes from surviving the worst and choosing to build something better. Tell me you love me, Elizabeth whispered, though she knew, had known since that first day, when he stood between her and evil without hesitation. I love you, Jack said, more than I have words for, more than I thought possible. I love you like the mountains love the sky, constant, eternal, and grateful for the meeting. That's beautiful, she said. You should have been a poet. I was a soldier. Then I was a hermit. Now I'm yours. That's poetry enough? As they drifted toward sleep, the young woman downstairs began to cry, the kind of tears that come when you finally reach safety. After running so long, you forgot what standing still felt like. Elizabeth started to get up, but Jack was already moving. I'll make her tea, he said. You showed me how? With honey for shock, chamomile for calm. You've become quite the caretaker, Mr. Turner. I learned from the best, Mrs. Turner. This was their life now. Not the quiet isolation Jack had planned, not the desperate survival Elizabeth had feared, but something neither had dared dream. A love that healed not just two broken people, but everyone their light touched. Years from now, when both were buried on the hill overlooking their ranch, people would still tell their story. The rancher who chose compassion over comfort. The widow who chose courage over collapse. Two broken people who built an unbreakable love. But that was still many years away. Tonight there was tea to make, tears to dry, and another lost soul to help find home. Tonight, there was love enough to spare and strength enough to share it. Some love stories begin with lightning and end with thunder. But the best ones, the ones that last, begin with one person saying to another, "You're safe now. You're home," and meaning it and proving it every single day until the mountains crumble and the wheat fields turn to dust. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in love that rises from ashes and becomes stronger than what was lost, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Share where you're watching from, whether it's a small town that knows everyone's business or a city where you can disappear. Remember, sometimes the worst day of your life is just the beginning of the best story you'll ever tell. Until next time, keep believing that broken doesn't mean worthless, and that sometimes two people's sharp edges fit together perfectly to build something whole.